I never believed in sleep paralysis until it happened to me. People always described it as some sort of nightmarish experience where your body refuses to move while something dark lingers in the room. I used to brush it off as exaggerated stories, but that was before that night, the night that changed everything. It started like any other evening. I was exhausted, having stayed up late working on a project. My apartment was quiet, the only sounds being the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant honking of cars outside. I remember lying down, closing my eyes, and slipping into what I thought would be a deep, dreamless sleep. But something felt off. At first, I was aware of my body sinking into the mattress, a strange heaviness pressing down on me. Then, as I tried to turn over, I realized I couldn't move, not even an inch. My limbs felt like they were buried under cement. My breathing became shallow, my chest tight, as if something unseen was sitting on it. Panic surged through me, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't even lift a finger. Then I noticed the presence, a shadow in the corner of my room. At first, it was barely visible, just a deeper darkness against the night, but slowly, it took shape. A tall, thin figure, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I wanted to tell myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but then it moved. It didn't walk. It glided. The figure drew closer, its form shifting like smoke yet solid enough to cast a long, warped shadow across my floor. My heart pounded in my chest, hammering so hard I thought it would burst. My mind screamed at me to wake up, to shake myself free from whatever nightmare this was. But I was trapped. Then it spoke. A whisper, dry and cracked, like dead leaves rustling in the wind. "You're awake, aren't you?" A cold rush of terror flooded through me. It knew I was aware. It knew I was helpless. The figure loomed over me now, its face, a void of absolute blackness, hovering just inches from mine. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to run, but my body remained frozen. The whisper came again, this time right by my ear. "I've been watching you." Something ice-cold brushed against my cheek, my vision blurred with tears, as I felt pressure on my chest increase. My lungs burned. I was suffocating. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the figure let out a slow, rattling breath and began to fade. And then, as suddenly as it began, I gasped, air rushing back into my lungs. My body jerked, freed from its invisible prison. The room was exactly the same. No sign of the figure. Just the dim glow of my bedside lamp and the ticking of the clock on the wall. But I knew what I had seen. And somehow, I knew it wasn't over. The next night, I was afraid to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. My body ached from exhaustion, but my mind refused to shut down. I kept replaying the previous night over and over again, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream, a hallucination, sleep paralysis, nothing more. But deep down, I knew the truth. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was lying in my bed, completely aware, yet unable to move. My limbs were heavy, my chest pinned down by an unseen force. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. It was back. I didn't need to see it to know. The air felt wrong, thicker, charged with something unnatural. The darkness in my room felt deeper, swallowing the faint light from my nightstand lamp. I strained my ears, listening. At first, there was silence. Then I heard it. A soft shuffling noise. It was coming from the foot of my bed. I tried to move, to lift my head, to even twitch my fingers. Nothing. My breath hitched as the shuffling grew louder, slow and deliberate, like bare feet dragging across the floor. My eyes darted frantically, searching the darkness. Then I saw it. A shadowy form crouched at the end of my bed, its head twisted at an unnatural angle, its elongated fingers gripping the blanket. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't just staring at me. It was crawling onto the bed. The mattress dipped under its weight. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to break free, but my body betrayed me. The thing moved closer, its form shifting in and out of focus like smoke struggling to take shape. My skin prickled as I felt the faintest touch near my foot, a sensation so cold it burned. Then a whisper. "You let me in." The voice was distorted, layered, as if multiple people were speaking at once. My breath came in ragged gasps as the figure inched closer, its weight pressing down on my legs, my stomach. My ribs ached under the invisible force. My vision blurred, my head spinning from lack of air. Just when I thought I was going to black out, the pressure suddenly lifted. The room shifted, like a rubber band snapping back into place. I gasped and bolted upright, my body drenched in cold sweat. My sheets were tangled, the air in the room thick with something unexplainable. I sucked in deep breaths, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. 2:47 a.m. I wasn't sure if I'd actually been asleep or caught somewhere between waking and dreaming. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just sleep paralysis. Something was in my room. And it was getting closer. The following days were unbearable. I was too afraid to sleep, yet exhaustion eventually forced me to. Each night, the paralysis returned, and each night, the presence grew stronger. It no longer just lingered in the shadows. It moved, whispered, touched, and worst of all, it seemed to be waiting for something. Desperate for answers, I started researching sleep paralysis. Science offered its explanations, something about the brain waking up before the body, hallucinations caused by REM sleep disturbances. But that didn't explain why I could feel it, why I could hear it, why it felt more real than the waking world. That's when I came across the stories. Legends of shadow people, night demons, entities that lurk in the in-between space of sleep and consciousness. Every culture had its own version. The old hag, the jinn, the strigoi. But one story caught my attention. A woman on an old paranormal forum had written about an entity that sounded exactly like mine. She called it the Watcher. She claimed it didn't just haunt dreams. It attached itself to people, growing stronger the more they feared it. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through her final post. Once you see it, it never really leaves. A knot formed in my stomach. If this was true, then I had made a terrible mistake. By acknowledging its presence, by fearing it, I had invited it in. That night, I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion won again. I barely remember drifting off before the familiar weight settled on my chest. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was wide awake. And this time, so was it. The room felt colder than usual. The darkness in the corners seemed to pulse, shifting unnaturally. I couldn't move, but I could feel its presence more clearly than ever before. Then I heard something new. A low, rhythmic clicking noise. At first, I thought it was coming from inside my own head. But then I realized it was breathing. Slow, ragged, deliberate. It wasn't just standing in the corner anymore. It was right beside me. My breath hitched as I felt something cold and weightless hover just inches from my face. The air around me seemed to vibrate, an unnatural pressure building in my skull. Then, for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't just a shadow. It had form, a twisted skeletal frame, unnaturally long limbs, hollow, gaping sockets where eyes should have been. Its mouth stretched open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that barely moved as it spoke. You called me. The words weren't spoken aloud. They burrowed into my mind like a parasite. My heart slammed against my ribs as I struggled to move, to scream, to do anything. Then it reached out. Its fingers, impossibly long and jagged, pressed against my forehead. Instantly, a flood of images filled my head. Dark rooms, twisted faces. Things that had been watching me my entire life without me ever realizing. I felt something inside me snap, like a thread being severed. Then I woke up, but something was wrong. The paralysis was gone, but my body still felt heavy. The room was exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. The closet door. It had been closed when I went to sleep. Now, it was wide open. I stared at the open closet door. My breath caught in my throat. The air in my room felt heavier than before, like something was still lingering, watching. My body was drenched in cold sweat, my limbs weak and trembling. I wanted to believe that it was just a coincidence, that maybe I had left the door open earlier and forgotten. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was no longer just in my sleep. It was here. I forced myself to sit up, my pulse hammering in my ears. The darkness inside the closet was thick, unnatural, as if it wasn't just an empty space but a void, a doorway to something else. Every instinct in me screamed not to look, not to acknowledge it. But I couldn't stop myself. Then I heard it, a faint whisper coming from inside. I see you. A cold chill shot through my spine. My hands clenched the sheets as I struggled to convince myself this wasn't real. But it was, and it was getting worse. I had to do something. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The screen's dim glow cast eerie shadows on my walls as I frantically searched for any way to stop this. The form, the woman's post. She had mentioned something about how to break the connection. Do not acknowledge it. Do not fear it. It feeds on fear. I swallowed hard. That was impossible. How could I not fear something that had invaded my sleep, crept into my room, whispered into my very thoughts? But I had no choice. Slowly, I lay back down. I shut my eyes, forced my breathing to slow, and told myself over and over that it wasn't real, that it had no power over me, that I wasn't afraid. The room fell deathly silent. Then suddenly, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward me. My heart pounded so violently I thought it would burst. I felt it standing beside my bed, its presence so overwhelming that the air itself seemed to thicken. A voice, low, guttural, inhuman, whispered right against my ear. You can't ignore me. I clenched my jaw, forcing my breathing to stay steady. It wasn't real. It was just a dream, just my mind playing tricks on me. A long pause. Then the whisper changed. You let me in, and now I live here. My body went rigid. I could feel it leaning over me, so close that its breath, cold and damp, sent a shiver down my neck. But I didn't open my eyes. I didn't react. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then the air shifted. The pressure in the room lifted. The cold presence faded. And then nothing. I opened my eyes. The room was still. The closet door was closed again. My chest rose and fell in heavy gasps as I struggled to process what had just happened. Had I broken the connection? Had I finally freed myself? For the first time in weeks, I slept without interruption. No whispers, no paralysis, no shadow in the corner. Days passed, then weeks. I told myself it was over, that I had won. Until last night. I woke up to a strange sensation. Not paralysis, not fear, but a deep, suffocating stillness. The room was silent, too silent. And then I saw it. Not in my sleep, not in the darkness, but in the mirror. Standing right behind me, smiling.